I remember the first time I laid eyes on her. It was at a coffee shop, the kind with mismatched furniture and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the air. She was sitting by the window, sunlight cascading over her like a halo, and I felt an inexplicable pull towards her. From that moment on, I was captivated. Our love story unfolded like a beautiful novel, filled with laughter, shared dreams, and whispered promises. I thought I had found my soulmate, the one who would stand by me through thick and thin. In the early days of our marriage, I was blissfully unaware of the cracks that would later form in our relationship. We would spend hours talking about our future, our hopes, and our fears. I felt like I was living in a dream, one where love conquered all. But as time passed, the reality of our life together began to seep in, and I started to notice the subtle signs that something was amiss. It began with her late nights at work. At first, I was supportive, understanding that her career was important to her. I would wait up for her, pouring myself into books or binge-watching shows, convincing myself that she was just busy. But as the weeks turned into months, the late nights became more frequent, and I found myself feeling increasingly isolated. I would ask her about her day, and she would respond with vague answers, her eyes darting away as if she were hiding something. Then there were the little things, the way she would flinch when I touched her, the distant look in her eyes during our conversations, and the sudden need for privacy with her phone. I brushed these signs aside, attributing them to stress or fatigue. After all, love is about patience and understanding, right? I wanted to believe that we were just going through a rough patch, that we could weather the storm together. But deep down, a nagging feeling began to take root. I started to question whether I was enough for her. Was I not attractive enough? Did I not provide her with the excitement she craved? I found myself spiraling into a pit of self-doubt, replaying our interactions in my mind, searching for clues that would explain her growing distance. One evening, as I sat alone in our dimly lit living room, I stumbled upon a message on her phone. It was a simple notification, but it felt like a punch to the gut. I hesitated, my heart racing as I picked up the device. I knew I shouldn't invade her privacy, but the urge to uncover the truth was overwhelming. I opened the message, and my world shattered. The words were intimate, filled with affection and longing, everything I thought was reserved for me. My heart sank as I realized I had been living a lie. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound could. I felt a whirlwind of emotions, shock, anger, and an overwhelming sense of sadness. How could she do this to me? How could the woman I loved betray my trust so completely? In that moment, I was engulfed in confusion. I had devoted myself to her, poured my heart and soul into our marriage, and yet here I was, standing on the precipice of despair. I wanted to scream, to confront her right then and there, but I was paralyzed by disbelief. How could I reconcile the woman I loved with the one who had shattered my heart? As I sat there, the weight of the revelation pressing down on me, I realized that this was just the beginning of a painful journey. A journey that would force me to confront not only her betrayal but also the deeper issues that had plagued our relationship. I was about to embark on a path of self-discovery, one that would challenge everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and my own worth. The moment I uncovered the truth about her infidelity felt surreal, as if I had stepped into a nightmare from which I couldn't wake. I sat there, the phone still clutched in my trembling hands, staring at the screen as if it held the answers to questions I hadn't yet formed. My heart raced, pounding against my ribcage like a caged animal desperate to escape. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead, and my breath quickened. How could she? The woman I had shared my life with, the one I had trusted implicitly, had betrayed me in the most profound way. I replayed the message over and over in my mind, trying to make sense of it. The words were filled with affection, a tenderness that I had longed for but hadn't felt in what seemed like ages. It was as if I had been living in a parallel universe, one where love was genuine and unwavering, while she had been crafting a different reality behind my back. I felt a surge of anger rise within me, hot and consuming. How dare she? How dare she take my love for granted? I had been nothing but devoted, sacrificing my own needs and desires to make her happy. I had been her cheerleader, her confidant, and yet, here I was, the fool who had been played. The betrayal felt like a knife twisting in my gut, and I could hardly breathe through the pain. In that moment, I was flooded with a cacophony of emotions: anger, sadness, disbelief, and a profound sense of loss. I had lost the woman I thought I knew, the partner I believed would stand by me through thick and thin. I felt like a ghost in my own life, haunting the memories of our shared moments, now tainted by the knowledge of her deceit. I thought back to the times we had laughed together, the dreams we had built, and the promises we had made. How could those moments have been real if she was capable of such betrayal? I felt like I was drowning in a sea of confusion, struggling to keep my head above water as the waves of despair crashed over me. I needed to confront her, to demand answers, but the thought of facing her filled me with dread. What would I say? How could I articulate the whirlwind of emotions that had taken hold of me? I felt like a puppet with its strings cut, lost and directionless. As the hours passed, I found myself pacing the living room, my mind racing with thoughts of revenge and retribution. I imagined confronting her, throwing her betrayal back in her face, but deep down, I knew that wouldn't bring me the closure I sought. I wanted to hurt her the way she had hurt me, to make her feel the pain of betrayal that now coursed through my veins. But as I wrestled with these thoughts, another realization began to take shape. This wasn't just about her betrayal, it was about me. I had allowed myself to be vulnerable, to love deeply, and in doing so, I had opened myself up to the possibility of pain. I had to confront not only her actions but also my own complicity in this mess. I had ignored the signs, brushed aside my instincts, and convinced myself that everything was fine. I had allowed her to dictate the terms of our relationship, to shape my self-worth based on her approval. I had become a shadow of myself, a man defined by someone else's perception of love. As the night wore on, I felt a flicker of determination ignite within me. I would not let her betrayal define me. I would not allow her to strip me of my dignity and self-worth. I needed to reclaim my identity, to find the strength to confront her not just as a husband but as a man who deserved respect and love. The thought of confronting her filled me with a mix of fear and resolve. I knew that the conversation would be fraught with tension, that emotions would run high, but I also understood that I could no longer remain silent. I had to speak my truth, to demand the respect I had been denied for far too long. As dawn broke, casting a soft light through the window, I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. I was ready to face her, to confront the reality of our relationship, and to begin the journey of reclaiming my self-worth. I would no longer be a passive participant in my own life. I would take control of my narrative, no matter how painful the process might be. As I sat in the quiet of the morning, the sun filtering through the curtains, I found myself reflecting on the years I had spent with her. It was a bittersweet journey, one filled with moments of joy overshadowed by the darker undercurrents of our relationship. I had always thought love was supposed to be uplifting, a source of strength and comfort. Yet, as I delved deeper into my memories, I began to recognize the patterns of verbal abuse that had woven themselves into the fabric of our life together. I recalled the first time she raised her voice at me, a seemingly innocuous argument over something trivial. I had made a comment about her spending habits, and instead of discussing it calmly, she had exploded. "You don't know anything about my life. You're just a failure who can't even keep a job." The words had cut through me like a knife, and I had stood there, stunned and speechless. I had wanted to defend myself, to explain that I was trying to help, but the venom in her voice had silenced me. In the days that followed, I had brushed it off, convincing myself that it was just a moment of frustration. But as time went on, those moments became more frequent. I began to internalize her words, allowing them to seep into my psyche. I started to believe that I was, in fact, a failure. I had lost my job a few months prior, and her words echoed in my mind, amplifying my insecurities. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, constantly trying to avoid triggering her anger. I remembered the nights when I would lie awake, replaying our conversations in my head, analyzing every word, every tone. I had become a master at deciphering her moods, trying to predict when she would lash out. I had learned to suppress my own feelings, to prioritize her emotions over my own. I had convinced myself that if I could just be better, if I could just make her happy, then everything would be okay. But the truth was, I was losing myself in the process. I had become a shadow of the man I once was, my self-esteem eroded by her constant criticisms. I had stopped pursuing my passions, my dreams, and instead, I had focused solely on her needs. I had sacrificed my own happiness for the sake of maintaining peace in our home, and in doing so, I had allowed her to wield power over me. As I reflected on these memories, I felt a wave of anger rise within me, not just towards her, but towards myself. How had I allowed this to happen? How had I let her words define my worth? I realized that I had been complicit in my own suffering, allowing her to dictate the terms of our relationship. I had accepted her verbal abuse as a normal part of love, convincing myself that it was just her way of expressing frustration. But now, as I faced the reality of her infidelity, I understood that I deserved better. I deserved to be treated with respect and kindness, not as a punching bag for her frustrations. I had spent too long in a toxic cycle, and it was time to break free. I began to recognize the patterns of manipulation that had characterized our relationship. She would often twist my words, turning my attempts at communication into ammunition against me. "You're just being dramatic," she would say, dismissing my feelings as if they were inconsequential. I had learned to doubt my own perceptions, to question my reality, and in doing so, I had lost sight of who I was. In those moments of reflection, I felt a flicker of empowerment. I was no longer the passive victim of her verbal abuse, I was a man who had endured and survived. I had the power to reclaim my narrative, to redefine my self-worth on my own terms. I began to understand that her words did not define me, they were a reflection of her own insecurities and frustrations. As I sat there, I made a silent vow to myself. I would no longer allow her to dictate my worth. I would confront her, not just about her infidelity, but about the way she had treated me throughout our relationship. I would demand the respect I had been denied for far too long. The journey ahead would not be easy, but I felt a newfound sense of determination. I was ready to face the truth, to confront the demons that had haunted me for years. I would no longer be a prisoner of her words, I would rise above the pain and reclaim my identity. With that realization, I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. I was ready to take the next step, to confront her and demand the respect I deserved. I would no longer be silent, I would speak my truth and reclaim my life. The days that followed my revelation were a whirlwind of emotions, each one more intense than the last. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a precipice, staring into the abyss of my own heartache. But as I grappled with the pain of betrayal and the memories of verbal abuse, I began to experience a profound shift within myself. It was as if the fog that had clouded my mind for so long was finally beginning to lift, revealing a clearer path forward. I started to reflect on the concept of self-worth, a notion that had eluded me for years. I had spent so much time trying to earn her love and approval that I had forgotten the most important relationship of all, the one I had with myself. I realized that I had been living my life in a constant state of seeking validation from her, allowing her words to shape my identity. But now, I was beginning to understand that my worth was not contingent upon her perception of me. I began to explore the idea that love should not come at the cost of my self-esteem. I had always believed that love was about sacrifice, about putting the other person's needs above my own. But as I delved deeper into my thoughts, I recognized that true love should be reciprocal. It should uplift, inspire, and empower both partners. I had been so focused on making her happy that I had neglected my own happiness, and in doing so, I had allowed her to take advantage of my devotion. I started to engage in self-reflection, journaling my thoughts and feelings as a way to process the turmoil within me. I wrote about my dreams, my passions, and the things that brought me joy. I began to reconnect with the parts of myself that I had buried beneath the weight of her expectations. I remembered the hobbies I had abandoned, the friendships I had neglected, and the dreams I had shelved in favor of her desires. With each word I penned, I felt a sense of liberation. I was reclaiming my identity, piece by piece. I began to understand that I was worthy of love, respect, and happiness, not just from her, but from myself. I started to challenge the negative beliefs I had internalized over the years. I was not a failure, I was a man who had faced adversity and emerged stronger. I was not unlovable, I was deserving of a love that honored my worth. As I continued this journey of self-discovery, I found myself seeking support from friends and family. I reached out to those I had distanced myself from during my marriage, and their encouragement was a balm to my wounded spirit. They reminded me of my strengths, my resilience, and the qualities that made me who I was. I began to see myself through their eyes, and it was a revelation. I also sought out literature on self-worth and emotional healing. I immersed myself in books that spoke to the importance of setting boundaries and recognizing toxic relationships. I learned about the dynamics of verbal abuse and how it can erode one's sense of self. Each page I turned was a step towards understanding the patterns that had ensnared me for so long. Through this process, I began to cultivate a sense of empowerment. I realized that I had the power to change my narrative, to rewrite the story of my life. I was no longer a passive participant, I was the author of my own journey. I started to envision a future where I was free from the shackles of her verbal abuse, a future where I could embrace my true self without fear of judgment. As I prepared for the inevitable confrontation with her, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I was no longer filled with dread, instead, I was filled with a quiet strength. I had come to understand that I deserved to be treated with respect, and I was ready to articulate that truth. I would no longer allow her to dictate my worth or my happiness. The day of the confrontation arrived, and I felt a mixture of nerves and determination. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say, but I knew that the conversation would likely take unexpected turns. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of the journey I had undertaken to reach this point. I was no longer the man who had cowered in the shadows of her anger, I was a man who had reclaimed his voice. As I walked into the living room, I felt a sense of clarity and purpose. I was ready to confront her, to demand the respect I had been denied for so long. I would no longer be silent, I would speak my truth and reclaim my life. The atmosphere in the house felt charged as I approached the moment I had both dreaded and anticipated. I could hear the faint sound of her moving about in the kitchen, the clinking of dishes and the hum of the radio filling the air. It was a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I took a deep breath, grounding myself in the resolve I had cultivated over the past few days. This was my moment to reclaim my voice, to demand the respect I deserved. I stepped into the kitchen, where she stood with her back to me, focused on preparing breakfast. The sight of her, so familiar yet so distant, sent a wave of conflicting emotions through me. I had loved this woman deeply, but now, I felt a chasm between us that seemed insurmountable. I cleared my throat, and she turned to face me, her expression shifting from surprise to curiosity. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil within. "Sure, what's up?" she replied, her tone casual, but I could see the flicker of apprehension in her eyes. I gestured for her to sit at the small kitchen table, and as she did, I took a moment to gather my thoughts. I had rehearsed this conversation in my mind countless times, but now that the moment was here, I felt the weight of my emotions pressing down on me. I needed to be clear, to articulate my feelings without letting anger cloud my judgment. "I found a message on your phone," I began, my heart racing. "A message that made it clear you've been unfaithful to me." Her expression shifted, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of guilt cross her face. But it was quickly replaced by defensiveness. "What are you talking about?" she shot back, her voice rising slightly. "You're being ridiculous." I felt a surge of anger at her dismissal, but I forced myself to remain calm. "I'm not being ridiculous. I saw the messages, and they were intimate. You've been lying to me, and I deserve to know why." She crossed her arms, her posture rigid. "You're just overreacting. It's not what you think." "Not what I think?" I echoed, incredulous. "You think I'm going to sit here and pretend that everything is fine? You've been distant for months, and now I find out you've been seeing someone else. How can you expect me to just accept that?" Her eyes narrowed, and I could see the walls she had built around herself. "You don't understand what I've been going through. You've been so focused on your own issues that you've ignored mine." I felt a wave of frustration wash over me. "This isn't about me. This is about you betraying my trust. You've belittled me, made me feel like I'm not enough, and now you want to turn this around on me? The tension in the room was palpable, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I had spent so long silencing my feelings, but now, I was determined to speak my truth. I've put up with your verbal abuse for too long. I've allowed you to dictate my worth, and I refuse to do that anymore. I deserve to be treated with respect, and I won't accept anything less. Her expression shifted, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of vulnerability. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said, her voice softer now. I was just lost. Lost? I repeated, incredulous. You think that justifies your actions? You've hurt me in ways I can't even begin to describe. I've spent years trying to make you happy, trying to be the man you wanted, and all the while, you've been betraying me. As I spoke, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. I was finally articulating the pain I had buried for so long. I was no longer the passive victim, I was a man reclaiming his power. I loved you, I continued, my voice steady. But love should not come at the cost of my self-worth. I deserve better than this, and I won't allow you to manipulate me any longer. She looked down, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't know how to handle everything. I thought I could find happiness elsewhere. I felt a pang of sadness at her admission, but I also felt a sense of clarity. You need to understand that your happiness cannot come at my expense. I can't be the person you lean on while you seek validation from someone else. I need to prioritize my own well-being now. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. I could see the realization dawning on her face, the understanding that our relationship had reached a breaking point. I don't know what to say, she finally admitted, her voice trembling. I never wanted to hurt you. I know, I replied, my tone softening. But intentions don't erase the damage that's been done. We need to figure out what this means for us moving forward. As we sat there, the weight of our conversation hung in the air. I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. I had confronted her, demanded the respect I deserved, and in doing so, I had taken a significant step towards reclaiming my identity. The road ahead would not be easy, but I felt a sense of empowerment that I had long thought lost. I was ready to face whatever came next, whether it meant rebuilding our relationship or walking away for good. The days following our confrontation were a whirlwind of emotions, a tumultuous mix of uncertainty and newfound clarity. I had laid bare my feelings, confronted the painful truth of her infidelity, and demanded the respect I had long been denied. But now, as I navigated the aftermath, I found myself grappling with the reality of what lay ahead. In the days that followed, we had several conversations, each one more difficult than the last. She expressed remorse, acknowledging the pain she had caused, but I could sense the struggle within her. She was torn between her desire to make amends and the reality of her actions. I, too, was torn. Part of me wanted to believe that we could rebuild our relationship, that we could find a way back to the love we once shared. But another part of me knew that trust, once shattered, was not easily repaired. I spent countless hours reflecting on our relationship, weighing the pros and cons of staying versus leaving. I thought about the years I had invested, the dreams we had built together, and the love that had once felt so pure. But I also thought about the pain, the verbal abuse, and the betrayal that had marred our connection. I realized that I could no longer ignore the toll it had taken on my self-esteem and my sense of self-worth. One evening, as I sat on the couch, I felt a sense of resolve wash over me. I picked up my journal, the one I had used to document my journey of self-discovery, and began to write. I poured my heart onto the pages, articulating my thoughts and feelings about our relationship. I wrote about the love I had once felt, the pain of betrayal, and the importance of self-respect. As I wrote, I felt a sense of liberation. I was no longer bound by the fear of losing her, I was reclaiming my narrative. I realized that I had the power to choose my path, to decide what was best for me. I didn't have to stay in a relationship that had caused me so much pain. I could choose to prioritize my own well-being, even if it meant walking away from the woman I had loved. The next day, I sat down with her once more. The atmosphere was heavy with unspoken words, but I knew it was time to make a decision. "We need to talk about where we go from here," I said, my voice steady. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "I want to make things right," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes to rebuild our trust." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my decision pressing down on me. "I appreciate that, but I need to be honest with you. I don't know if I can trust you again. The pain of your betrayal runs deep, and I can't ignore the years of verbal abuse that have shaped my self-worth." Her expression shifted, and I could see the realization dawning on her. "Are you saying you want to end things?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. "I think it's best for both of us. I need to prioritize my own healing and self-respect. I can't continue in a relationship where I feel diminished." Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. I had loved her deeply, and the thought of ending our relationship was painful. But I also knew that staying would only prolong the inevitable and hinder my journey towards healing. "I'm sorry for everything," she said, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you." "I know," I replied softly. "But intentions don't erase the damage. I need to focus on rebuilding my life, and I can't do that while holding on to the past." As we sat there, the weight of our decision hung in the air. I felt a sense of finality wash over me, a bittersweet acknowledgement that our love story had reached its conclusion. It was time to close this chapter and embrace the unknown future that lay ahead. In the weeks that followed, I focused on my healing. I sought therapy to help me process the emotional turmoil I had experienced, and I surrounded myself with supportive friends and family. I began to rediscover my passions, diving back into hobbies I had neglected for far too long. I started to embrace the person I had once been, the man who was worthy of love and respect. As I moved forward, I felt a sense of empowerment that I had never known before. I was no longer defined by her actions or the pain of our past. I was reclaiming my identity, embracing my worth, and learning to love myself again. In the end, I realized that the journey of self-discovery was not just about healing from betrayal, it was about embracing my own strength and resilience. I had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, ready to embrace whatever the future held. As I closed the chapter on our relationship, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I was ready to step into the next phase of my life, armed with the knowledge that I deserved love, respect, and happiness, both from others and from myself.